Afternoon. Today I'm going to finish reading my chapter 1 draft. For my novel. Any feedback would be very welcome. So this is set in a country on a continent located between the Americas and Asia. So it's an imaginary country. And we're eventually going to be getting into politics and all, the politics of the empire and all that, from the point of view of the provinces. And specifically from the protagonist, Lady Margret and her friends. So, where we left off, Margret was learning geography, and she was also learning panegyric, how to praise the emperor. A very important lesson indeed. And she has a friend, Sandaran, who's visiting, and her friend and her little sister, Audrey. So, a month later, Sandaran went home, and life continued as usual for the next couple of years, with lessons, feminine pursuits, and escapades alternating with each other. Margret took to waving a stick around and pretending it was a sword, at least when no grown-ups were around to tell her to act like a lady. She wished there was someone to practice fencing with, but no one would. Her fixation on peasants continued, supplemented by an obsession with barbarians. "Come, Audrey," she said one day. "Let's go talk to the butchers, or try to. Hopefully they won't be so grouchy this time." The butchers were all slaves captured in the wars against the barbarians, and dwelt in the northern grounds because that was a place of relative dishonor. They not unnaturally preferred to keep communication with the family of their enslavers to a minimum. "Come on, I want to talk to barbarians." Audrey clapped her hands in refusal. "You can. They're too fierce for me. I'd rather play with dolls." She picked up a needle and thread and began sewing one of her doll's dresses. "Don't be a coward." Margret put on her cloak, grabbed her parasol, and headed for the nursery door. "I can be cowardly all I want," retorted her sister obstinately. So Margret had to go by herself. She walked past the stables to the northern garden, where most of the trees were conifers and the flowers were fewer and less colorful. After pausing to admire the reflections of the trees in the pond of truth, and toss some crumbs to the flightless ducks and striped swans, she followed a rugged path until she reached some crude straw huts, each standing next to a chopping block. Here the slaves dwelt. She ran up to the nearest hut and peered inside. Apart from a couple of crude wooden idols and some straw on the ground, you couldn't really call it a floor. There was no furniture and there were no decorations. That is, unless you counted the dead animals hanging on a rack. One of the butchers was sharpening a knife on a whetstone. He was rather pale, at least by Kallumans standards, with a white tattoo on his forehead in the shape of a hawk's head, and wore plain brown clothing apart from the blue and green saber-toothed tiger's head on his shirt, a sign which marked him as Count Pilamar's property. "What's your name?" she asked. "I am Mardigal, son of Nach of Mel, mistress," he replied with brief courtesy. He put down his knife and joined both hands over his head, a sign of respect among his people. I'll never be able to pronounce all that. But it wouldn't do to say that out loud. Now that she was here, she felt shy and wondered what sorts of things the slaves talked about. How is your family? Mardigal's face darkened, though he still spoke politely. I do not know, mistress. Your father took them from me. Why? Margret was shocked. It did not sound like something her father would do. Had you done something bad? We lost the battle and were captured. We have no family now. He picked up his knife and made as if to go back to sharpening it. May I go back to work, mistress? Oh, of course, she blurted out, horrified. I am so sorry. I didn't know. He knelt politely, and Margret bowed her head and ran back to Tserthaton, quite forgetting that she must never run when any grown-ups might see her. Where is my mother? She asked Ahar upon reaching the castle entrance. The guard looked at her quizzically, but only said, Your gracious mother is in the study, my lady. Thank you for not calling me little great one, Ahar. You know how I hate that. Ahar laughed and let her in. Margret ran up the ladder to the second floor, turned right, and dashed into the study, where Makaruna was leafing through the castle archives, studying tribute receipts. Mother, yelled Margret, why do we have slaves, and why do we take them from their families? Do not yell, Margret. Makaruna put down the document she was reading. And do not run. You were old enough to know better. Now tell me what happened. I'm sorry, said Margret, and told her mother about her conversation with Mardigal. Why do we have slaves? We only have slaves whom we capture in war, replied Makaruna. Unbelievers captured in war may be enslaved. This is well known. Your father treats them more kindly than most. Margret began stamping her foot, but caught herself and pretended to have an itch instead. But we take them from their families. That is wrong. Makaruna kissed Margret with her eyelashes and smiled sadly. We cannot enslave their families as well, and that would be unjust anyway, to enslave people who weren't fighting us, she explained. At least now they can learn the truth. We could teach them the truth without enslaving them. Karat taught it, and he didn't enslave anyone. We should fight the Chuggans anyway, not these fell. Margret meant Hmel, of course, but found that hard to pronounce. That decision is not for you to make, and you should not have asked the slave about his family. It was unkind. I meant to be kind. Meaning and doing are two different things, beloved. It is time you learnt these things. You will not be a young child much longer. As Karat revealed in Thy Soul, Karu Ambi, do compassion wisely. You may ask nobles about their families, and even peasants, but not slaves. Margret found all this very confusing, but bowed her head. Makaruna smiled and stroked Margret's hair. And now to other matters. When you are 9 years old and have completed the third and central of the 5 ages of childhood, we intend to have your cousins Barama and Tiaku here for an extended visit. It will be good for you to associate with children who live nearer to the court and are more familiar with its ways. rather than only with the daughters of your father's vassals. Even your friend Sandaranian, though of high birth like you, lives far from court. Also, you must now start learning Taranian in earnest. Now you only have a passing familiarity with it. I don't like Tiaku. I hope Orama isn't like her. I don't mind learning Taranian, though. Margret had only met Tiaku once, when Aunt Imuni had brought her to Tserthatan for a visit. And Tiaku had spent the entire visit snubbing Margret and calling her peasant girl. Tiaku fancied herself very sophisticated, whilst Margret thought sophistication silly. So she looked forward to the visit with at best a certain ambivalence. Tell me the story of the crow and Funuru, she said after a brief silence. Her gaffe with the slave had made her feel like a child again, and she wanted to be comforted. Once there was an old peasant and his wife, who saw a strange thing in their yard. There was a small funuru in the meadow, who had lost its parents and had no one to care for it. But then, one day, a crow appeared and swooped down towards the funuru. They feared it might attack the little animal, but instead the crow gave it food. Every morning and evening, the crow would come by with food for the funuru. So the couple began leaving food out, and the crow would always let the funuru eat first. And whenever there was danger, such as a predator or a hunter, the crow would warn the funuru to stay away. Or, if the funuru saw it first, it would warn the crow. That example was sent by Ishtaka to show us that we must minister to the poor and weak, said Margret with pride. Yajani Pash told me so. Markaruna smiled, but with wisdom. And that is chapter 1. Presently, I'll be reading chapter 2. I need to get the draft. I need to work on the draft and get it ready, get it presentable. These first 2 chapters are mostly providing the background and providing some foreshadowing and introducing us to the characters and to the world, because this is in a different. Because it's in an imaginary country with a different culture and with different animals and different plants, different flora and fauna, and a different culture. We'll start getting towards the actual plot by chapter 3, and by chapter 5 we start introducing the antagonists. So that is that for now, and either tomorrow or on Tuesday I'll finish up the Ireland video. So bye-bye for now. Have a riot.